students present here, a warm welcome to the webinar on importance of native seeds in sustainable agriculture. On this occasion, let me introduce Center of Excellence in Sustainable Development, Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya. It organizes activities from time to time to generate awareness amongst the youth and sensitize them towards their responsibility towards environment. The Center of Excellence in Sustainable Development was established by Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya Indore on July 23, 2019. Since then, the center has taken several initiatives for conservation of the environment. The first initiative taken by the center was the proper channelization of electronic waste generated by the university. E-waste is a threat to humanity and the environment. Realizing this, CSD disposed of 2.2 tons of electronic waste of university with a registered company of electronic waste. In order to promote recycling and save trees, Center of Excellence in Sustainable Development channelized 3,700 kg of unimportant papers to paper recycler Green Labs Recycling. The center initiated an awareness drive, Say No to Plastic, and ensured not to use single-use plastics during events hosted by the university. In every event, special emphasis is laid on minimum waste generation. An awareness campaign on #BagYourReusable was coordinated by Center in collaboration with Indore Municipal Corporation to raise mass awareness about the hazards of plastics and to encourage people to carry and use possible eco-friendly alternatives such as steel glasses, spoons, and bottles. The center also celebrated Swachhta Pakhwada as per the guidelines of the University Grants Commission. During this period, number of Swachhta and environment-related activities were undertaken. Students of university performed Nukkad Nataks for primary and middle class students in the nearby villages with an objective to raise awareness among the young ones to minimize the use of single plastic and explaining them the significance of maintaining cleanliness and hygiene. Air pollution, its compact and control strategies is well taken up by the center, and wherein senior scientists and regional laboratory head Madhya Pradesh Pollution Control Board, Dr. D.K. Waghela, former scientist Madhya Pradesh Pollution Control Board, joined as a resource person. Billions of people still lack safe water and adequate sanitation facilities. In order to raise awareness about the need of ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, a webinar on sustainable development goal, clean water and sanitation was organized by the center. Foundation Day of the center is also celebrated. One such program was focused on raising awareness towards management of biomedical waste for good health. In addition to this, the center organizes memorial oration by Padma awardees in fond memory of great environmental warrior, Shri Sundarlal Bahugana. The speaker of the first oration was Padma Bhushan Dr. Anil Prakash Joshi ji. Speaker for the second oration was Padma Shri Shyam Sundar Paliwal ji, eminent environmentalist. Center celebrates World Environment Day as per the prescribed themes. In one such program, Dr. Rakesh Kumar, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, New Delhi, delivered on importance of ecosystem restoration for good health and well-being. This year, we had Padma Shri Maheshji Sharma as the speaker for World Environment Day oration. Center organized a 3-day online training program in collaboration with the National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, New Delhi in January 2022. Soil is an important part of our existence. Center of Excellence in Sustainable Development conducted Save Soil campaign with Isha Foundation in the month of April this year. Center in collaboration with Jimmy and Janak McGilligan Foundation for Sustainable Development organized Jimmy McGilligan Memorial Week on Innovation and Development Sustainable Technologies for accomplishing Sustainable Development Goals. Earth Day was celebrated by organizing poster and debate competitions in order to make youth aware regarding the need of sustainable infrastructure. Center conducted Bridge Innovation competition. Many events are in pipeline for making society aware about the need of protecting the environment, as Earth is the only planet that supports life. This is the brief of the efforts of Center of Excellence Sustainable Development, Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya, towards environment conservation and sustainable development. Thank you so much. Over to Abhijit.
Let's have a few glimpses of the video of Center of Excellence in Sustainable Development. I request the technical team to kindly play the same. Thank you. I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya, Dr. Upender Rai, to deliver his welcome speech to this August gathering.
Good morning to all of you. Distinguished speaker for this webinar, Dr. Vandana Shiva, Chairperson of the Center of Excellence, all members of the Center of Excellence, directors of the institutes, faculty colleagues, guests, and my dear students. As it has already been mentioned, that our university is very much concerned about the protection of environment, and various steps have been taken from time to time to know more about what we can do to protect the environment. United Nations had set up 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, setting the target of accomplishing these goals, achieving these goals by 2030. That means within 15 years, we have completed almost 50% of that, and lot needs to be achieved. If we take a review, though on one hand we have completed half of the period, that is in terms of time, but in terms of achievements, we are very much far away. I would like to draw your attention to SDG 15, Sustainable Development Goal 15. That's life on land. And then if you see the statistics, how much damage has been made by us, sometimes inadvertently, but sometimes very consciously and advertently. Therefore, we need to keep on hammering ourselves, reminding ourselves about what needs to be done. That sensitization is very important. One new parts of the world, people, the level of consciousness has improved, it has increased. But then that's not enough. Only being aware is not enough. That is the first step. That is the first step. You see, so far as our city is concerned, Indore has been ranked cleanest city continuously in last 5 years. And that's an achievement and an indicator of the consciousness of the people of Indore about cleanliness. But beyond cleanliness, we need to see how life on this earth, life on land, whether it is vegetation or animals, how to protect it. So that's what makes today's webinar very relevant and very important. I'm very happy that a well-known environmentalist, Dr. Vandana Shiva, is with us. And I would like to welcome her to this webinar and educate us about what further needs to be done, how to procure the sustainable seeds, and in turn ensure sustainable environment. It is not, when we talk about this issue, as I said, United Nations had set up these goals, 17 goals. So it's not a local issue. The issue is worldwide. But from our side, whatever best we can do, we should do. So not standing between our distinguished speaker and all of you, and know all of you are very eager to listen to her. So once again, I welcome her and I wish happy learning to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. A brief introduction about our guest speaker. Dr. Vandana Shiva, a world-renowned environmental thinker, activist, feminist, philosopher of science, writer, and science policy advocate, is the founder of Naudanya Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology, and president of Naudanya International, Trained as a physicist at the University of Punjab, she completed her PhD on the hidden variables and non-locality in quantum theory from the University of Western Ontario, Canada. She later shifted to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and environmental policy, which she carried out at the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. In 1982, she founded the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology, an independent research institute that addresses the most significant problems of ecology of our times. And 2 years later, now there are 9 seats. The movement is in defense of biodiversity and small farmers. In 2011, she founded Navdanna International in Italy and is chairman of the International Commission on the Future of Food and Agriculture, co-founded with then president of region of Tuscany. Recipient of many awards, including in 1993, the Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, and named among the top 5 most important people in Asia by Asia Week in 2001. She is a prolific writer, author, and of numerous books, and serves on the board of International Forum on Globalization and member of the Executive Committee of the World Future Council. Without further ado, I will now call upon our chief guest, Dr. Vandana Shiva, to enlighten us on the sustainable agricultural practices of selecting native seeds and its role in fulfilling sustainable goals. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much to the university and its Center of Excellence in Sustainable Development, to the Vice Chancellor, to the Dean, to all the faculty. As was mentioned in my background, my chosen path was to study in depth the psi function, the quanta of quantum theory. And yet my life's journey has brought me to the seed. And from 1984 onwards, it is the seed that I have focused on, both to learn about how nature works, how agriculture works, and how our culture works. In our culture, we call seed bij. Bij, that which arises on its own forever and ever, that is seed. What is seed in the industrial West? That which does not ever give seed, non-renewable, a commodity, an intellectual property. I had studied in Punjab, and in 1984, Punjab erupted in violence. And it made no sense to me because I knew a very prosperous Punjab, hardworking Punjab. And if you look in depth, in the Guru Granth Sahib, if you look at the teachings of the Gurus of Punjab, it's all about agriculture, it's all about nature. And I think there's a very special reason why agriculture has been strong in Punjab, because of the teachings of the Sikh Gurus. Even during independence, there were big movements to not allow land alienation and indebtedness. There was a Land Alienation Act passed by Sir Choturam, who was the governor of the Northwestern provinces, in order to defend the peasant holdings, Punjab. And that was because there was a strong movement in Punjab. How is it that Punjab ended up a land of debt, a land of desertification? The water is going to disappear in Punjab in the next few decades because it was chosen as the place where the so-called Green Revolution was first introduced. The Green Revolution sounds wonderful. You know, who doesn't want a Green Revolution? That's what is the name of anything sustainable these days. But the Green Revolution was anything but sustainable. It was literally imposed by the Rockefeller Foundation, the World Bank, the US aid, US government, basically in order to sell more chemicals. The chemicals that had been used in war were now being turned into agrochemicals, and agriculture, and the story of the seed was being changed in order to sell leftover war chemicals. Synthetic fertilizers come from the same processes that make explosives which is why so many bombs are fertilizer bombs. The ancestors of all pesticides were the gases that were used to kill people in the concentration camps. So the technologies of killing became agriculture technologies, but agriculture is the culture of cultivation of life. So it turned agriculture from a system that gives life to a system where the highest destruction is taking place. We are a land and a civilization and a culture which evolved the most sophisticated ways of farming. We never worked in monocultures, we always worked with diversity. We worked with what I call 4-dimensional farming. Look at the spice gardens of Kerala, which made us the heart of international trade for thousands of years. We were 25% of the world economy on the basis of what we grew. Our special spices, our beautiful textiles, our natural dyes like indigo. And then, of course, the East India Company was created because of that wealth, to take that wealth. And they managed very cleverly through the British period to transfer $45 trillion from India, from agriculture, the lagan of the peasants. And I think for the younger generations, it's extremely important to try and understand why from an agriculture that provided so much wealth, how has agriculture become the place where there's the highest debt of farmers? 75% farmers are indebted for chemicals and seeds. And since globalization and the liberalization of trade started and the global seed companies could enter India, we've lost 400,000 farmers to suicide due to debt. This does not have to be. It is because of the way value creation is moved from what nature provides and what producers provide to the appropriators. Exactly like in the colonial times. How is it that the East India Company was becoming richer? The British Empire was taking 45 trillion, while we were sinking in famine. 40 to 60 million people died. Famine linked to lagan. It isn't that we weren't producing enough. It's just that all of it was being taken away. And today, your theme is zero hunger. There's more than 1 billion people hungry. But the more tragic figure is half of the hungry are producers of agriculture. I'm not saying producers of food, because if they were growing food, they'd be eating food. They're growing commodities. And they're growing commodities with debt. I have seen this. For example, in Kalahandi, heart of the richness of rice. Their fields are full. And yet there's starvation. Because now rice is being grown with chemicals. The farmer borrows. I have seen in tribal areas of India, in my short lifetime, tribals selling their silver jewelry to buy urea. So they're in there. The first time you can buy urea with silver, but the next time you have no silver to sell. So what happens is a cycle of debt is created. The farmer sells cheap, but then has to eat. So the same rice that he sold for 2 rupees is now bought at 10 rupees, except of course where the subsidized rice is being given. And this is the world phenomenon. What farmers grow and sell is so cheap, and that is the rules of globalization in WTO. My studies are showing 5% is reaching the producer of what the consumer pays. And I'll come a little bit to the more recent crisis of hunger and some of the false narratives being spread, including the pressure on India to export wheat. Because when something is reduced to a commodity, then trading becomes the first objective, not eating. We are a land that evolved rich diversity. Just think of the sophistication of breeding, where one grass, Rhiza sativa, could be turned into 200,000 rice varieties. Now the heart of this Vavilov Center is today's Chhattisgarh and Orissa, and that's why it's not an accident that the oldest rice research institute is in India, in Cuttack. And Dr. Risharia, who's like my guru for teaching, and Dr. Risharia was the director of the Cuttack Rice Research Institute. And when the World Bank and the international interests had imposed the Green Revolution, they also needed all our diversity, not to grow in our fields, but as raw material for future breeding. So they wanted to take our rice collections, and Risharia said, no, this is our national heritage. And then the pressure, international pressures were huge. He was removed from the Cuttack Rice Research Institute. He created the Madhya Pradesh Rice Research Institute. And then he created the collections at the Raipur University. And when I realized that I had to save seeds, I invited Dr. Risharia to come and stay with us in Dehradun to teach me everything that I needed to know. Why did I start saving seeds? I had already noticed that so many of the categories used in the Green Revolution are actually scientifically fraudulent. Simple term like high yielding varieties. Yield of what? Food is what you eat. Is it producing more nutrition? No, they're low yielding in terms of nutrition. They're nutritionally empty varieties. To the extent that a governor of Punjab said at one conference that I don't eat the Punjab wheats because they're nutritionally empty. I go to Madhya Pradesh to buy the wheats because Madhya Pradesh still has the old varieties, the Katiyas and the Sharbatis. And they are much richer in nutrition, but much tastier. Yeah, 2 rotis of the old wheats is equal to 5 rotis of the bad wheat. And if you notice, the bad wheat goes bad and smells, whereas Sharbatis doesn't just taste Sharbati, but it smells Sharbati. And these are not measured, the quality, the taste are not measured. Seed is food. Seed is the beginning of agriculture. It's the first step in agriculture. What do you want to do in agriculture? You want agriculture that produces more food. If your nutrition is empty, you're not producing food, you're producing commodities for trade. Second is, it must be resilient. Yeah, it must be resilient to pests, to disease, to environmental factors. And this becomes even more important in times of climate change. Seed must conserve resources because seed is the first step. And through it, the fate of the soil, the fate of the pollinators, the fate of all network in an ecosystem is decided. When our native seeds were declared primitive, literally called primitive, or low yielding without measuring them, in the Green Revolution text, I read every book on the Green Revolution when I did my study on the Green Revolution for the United Nations University. And found that there were interesting statements like the soil is an empty container for pouring source nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The plant is a machine, and the fuel is the urea. This is a very mechanistic Cartesian view of the world. It is not the way living systems work. It is a distortion of living systems. And you are in a very, very special place in Indore. Because when I was doing the book on the Green Revolution for the United Nations University, I wanted to understand how agriculture was. I mean, it's not that I didn't know by experience. My mother had chosen to become a farmer after becoming a refugee when Pakistan and India were created. So we grew up on the farm, and I've grown up, watching farms across the India. So it isn't that I didn't know what farming was like, but there was no literature. And the first book that described what farming of India was the man who was sent by the British to improve our agriculture, Sir Albert Howard. Howard was sent to India in 1905. It's going to be a century. Yeah. He arrived in Pusa, where the university was to have been created. Of course, there was an earthquake, and that's why Pusa Institute is in Delhi. And he says, I arrived and I found the soils were fertile. There were lots of insects, but no pests. And said, how can I tell the farmers how to improve their soil? when it is richer than anything we have in UK. He said, I will make the peasant of India my teacher. The humility of a true scientist is to recognize where knowledge is. And he said, I'm going to study under the Indian peasant. And he wrote a book called The Agricultural Testament, which is the Bible of modern organic farming, which went from India. Now, I'm giving you this background because Monsanto, with whom I've had endless interactions over the decades, at a certain point accused me of importing organic. And so I started to do the Harvard lectures to show the world that organic went from India to the world. We are not importing this idea. This is what we've given to the world. Why am I mentioning Indore as special? Because after having worked for a few years in Bihar and trying to set up the university there, eventually he shifted to Indore, and the Holkars supported him. And to visit in the Agriculture College campus is the Harvard lab. And during 2015, when we did the soil pilgrimage to Gandhi's ashram in Sevagram, to Harvard's lab, it was re-inaugurated. People had forgotten that Harvard had worked on soil in that lab, that Gandhi visited Indore to see the Indore method. It's called organic farming spread in the world through a method called Indore method of farming. Please reclaim that heritage. And you as a university placed in Indore can do so much on this and start preparing now for 2005, the centennial of Harvard being sent to India to reclaim our amazing ecological civilization. So here was the Green Revolution. Their main purpose was selling chemicals, and Borlaug has said that as much. But the problem was when our native seeds, like our native wheats or our native rices, if you notice, they're tall varieties. And they're tall varieties because for us, food is for all beings. Food is not just for human beings, because food is what connects all beings. So we grow tall straw to be able to feed our animals, to be able to feed back to the soil. Straw becomes compost. Grain is not just food for us, but is food for the future. What is seed? Seed is food for the future. The problem with chemicals was when you apply to native varieties, they lodge if there's a wind or there's rain. So Mr. Borlaug was set on the task of how to adapt plants to chemicals, to war chemicals. And the dwarf varieties were created. The straw is useless, no animal will touch it. The fact that Punjab is put into disrepute every year in winter for burning of stubble, they don't even call it straw anymore, they call it stubble, is because once they brought the new dwarf varieties, pumped the chemicals, the grain was harvested with combined harvesters, the stubble was left and it was set on fire by prescription of the same interests, said burn, because a farmer wasn't going to pay a combined harvester as well as the labor to cut the rest of the straw. So you have not just the problem of disappearance of food for the future, because if you don't have straw and you don't have compost and you don't have organic matter and you sow seeds don't provide any of this, you have no food for the soil, you have no food for the future. The Vice Chancellor talked about the levels of degradation of the land, desertification, totally linked to shifting from an agriculture that takes care of the land to an agriculture that exploits the soil and exports the commodity. This low-yielding, high-yielding debate is misleading because when you only measure the grain that goes to the market and you don't measure the straw that disappears, you're not doing a truthful study of the whole plant. But if you don't study the plant and all the other plants that work in our systems, we grow 12 plants together, Baranaja, 9 crops together, that's Navdanya. That's why I named Navdanya, because a tribal in Tamil Nadu gave me the significance of Navdanya as the 9 planets the plants and biodiversity in on the ground, and the biodiversity of food for our health, now science is recognizing that biodiversity is health. The richer the biodiversity in the soil, the more is the nutrition in your food. We have so many studies and so much literature. We have a very, very good book called Annam, Food as Health, in which we have summarized both the ancient Ayurvedic knowledge of food as well as the new learnings of the soil microbiome, our gut microbiome, and everything else that's connected. We have recognized that food is the currency of life. Everything is food, everything is something else's food. This is the food cycle. This is the nutrition cycle. But if it has to be completed as a nutrition cycle, it begins with seed. Seed that gives food for the bees, for the earthworms, for the mycorrhizal fungi, is a continuum of life on earth. Seed, whose main purpose is to use more chemicals, starts to destroy the cycles. So it destroys the hydrological cycle. My study on Punjab showed 10 times more water gets used to produce the same amount of wheat. And Punjab never grew rice. On our farm, we have 16 times more pollinators than in the forest next door. Because when I grow a crop for food for all, even the pollen is food for the bees, for the butterflies, for the pollinators. And the pollinators create future food. 1/5, 1/3 of the food we eat. We've done lots of research and experiments on this. 1/3 of the food we eat comes from pollination. Another large part comes from the soil. Human beings are merely facilitators. They're merely keepers of the seed and keepers of the soil. And when they do that work right, we have high levels of productivity. The Green Revolution, by reducing yield to only the grain that gets sold, forgetting what happened to the soil, forgetting what happened to the farmer, forgetting what happened to all the insects and birds, forgetting what happened to the soil organisms, has actually given us a system that is destroying the very basis of food production. It is undermining SDG 2, but not just SDG 2. I've analyzed that agriculture system that starts working around principles of destruction, death, and killing, instead of protecting biodiversity, the seed, regeneration, ends up being the single biggest cause of destruction on this planet today. And it's very recent. 60s is Green Revolution in India. All the desertification is post that. Till Green Revolution has come to areas, in the most arid areas like Rajasthan, the water will be at 10 feet and the Persian wheel used to pull the water out. The minute the Green Revolution comes, you start to drill deep and you have a water famine. I know this is happening in your part of India. It happened in Gujarat. I saw farms with 1,500 feet deep tube wells. And of course, a farmer doesn't have that kind of money. So the land transfers to those who actually start leasing the land, become landowners through the water cycle. Good seed is a water conserver. And I'll give you 2 examples. Come back to the tall varieties of native varieties of seed. When I grow a tall variety of rice or wheat, I am putting a lot of organic matter back in the soil. 1% organic matter, 1%, holds 160,000 liters of water in the soil moisture. With this year's heat wave, and even now the heat hasn't gone, this year's heat wave, while sitting at the Natania farm, I said to my colleagues, I said, with this heat wave, we better really try and understand what protects us from vulnerability to heat, from desertification. And we did 3 quick measurements. The soil on our farm, where we have trees on the field buns, and then the soil in our neighboring farm, which is using urea with no trees at all, the difference in soil temperature was 25 degrees centigrade. So if you're having a heat wave Do you want 25 degrees high up temperature in your soil to kill your plants, or lower temperature? Planting trees, planting crops that go with trees becomes very important. And then moisture, 15% difference between the moisture and the urea soil. The soils with urea are deserts. They have no water holding capacity. Living soils are urea free. They are humus. Humus is what holds water, that 160,000 liters of water per day. So with climate change, we're going to see more heat, we're going to see more drought. We have to protect the soil. But the soil will only be protected through the seeds that create food for the soil first. But if we protect the soil will give us food. We won't starve. Research is showing that photosynthesis increases 5-fold with good organic matter in the soil. And the richer the photosynthesis, the more is the productivity of the plant. So I've done many books over these many years because, the reason I've done so many books is the falsehoods that get spread. As a scientist, I care for truth. As a scientist, I care for real understanding of how nature works. And when the Green Revolution says we produce more food, when all you did is produce more bad rice and wheat and destroyed all the food, you destroyed all the millets, you destroyed all the pulses, you destroyed all the oilseeds. And we are dependent on imports of these products. We were the biggest producers of pulses and the biggest producers of oilseeds in the Green Revolution. Today, 75% of our edible oil needs are met by exports of bad, inedible oil like GM soya, palm oil. I remember my early visits to Indore. What used to fascinate me was the namkeen shops with hundreds of namkeens made of the different kinds of dals. They've all disappeared. You have a few specialized shops. Now, they haven't disappeared automatically. They first disappeared because our dals were replaced by soya bean. And I have analyzed World Bank projects in your area that displace your dals to grow soya bean for exports for animal feed. We got, the big edible oil industry on soya because we were exporting the oil seed, the oil cake for animal feed to Europe. But then with WTO, we got the new rules of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and all the small scale industry disappeared. Bikaneri bhujia, 50,000 women used to be employed. Bikaneri bhujia is sold by Pepsi today. You have a very, very beautiful Sarafa of diversity of food. I have visited there many times, and I have given awards to those who carry that food heritage, because there's a huge attempt to destroy food heritage regularly, and I'll come to that in a while. But my book, Soil Not Oil, which I wrote for the climate convention in Copenhagen, I realized 50% of the emissions come from a bad food system. How you grow it with urea. Urea emissions a nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more damaging to the climate than carbon dioxide. But no one talks of nitrous oxide. There's a total conspiracy of silence. Total conspiracy of silence on the worst greenhouse gas, because all industrial interests are committed to promoting more use of fertilizer and larger scale farms. And they have declared a war against the earth and against the small farmers. 75% of the soil, land, water degradation is because of chemical industrial farming and monoculture commodity production. There's a UN land degradation agreement, and we have worked with them. And easily, the land use is the basic reason. In 1995, it was clear that 75% of the biodiversity of crops had disappeared because of so-called modern farming. Today, I would say 90%. But every time you destroy the crop by replacing the native variety, you destroy the insects. There is an insectagadon. 80% insect species have disappeared. Soil organisms, it's a desert. But it isn't even that after destroying the environment, the ecosystem, our life support system, this system is working to give us food. It's not. 1 billion people are permanently, structurally hungry. This was made worse during COVID. And if we didn't have community initiatives of people cooking and distributing food, people would have died of hunger. Now, with the Ukraine war, of course, there's a lot of fear of food and famine right now, but it's a bit exaggerated because last year, Ukraine exported 40 million tons of wheat. This year, it's exported 46 million. So it's not true that the exports from Ukraine have dried up. But more important than that, the data is so clear that 75% of the buying of wheat this year is not by trade for distribution as food. It's by speculation. The biggest money of the world, which is in the hands of what's called the asset management firms. These are the firms that manage the assets of the billionaires. 10 billionaires control more wealth than 40% of humanity. 10 billionaires. 10% of the rich pollute 50% of the atmosphere. So we are seeing a very, very clear division in the world. These new firms are called BlackRock, Vanguard. I have a book called Oneness versus 1%. When I tried to understand why Mr. Bill Gates was telling governments how he was a billionaire now becoming the rule maker, how was he becoming the new provider of solutions to what should be done? And I wrote the book Oneness versus 1%. The seed has been at the heart of all non-sustainability in food systems, because seed is the place where life renews itself. But life renewing itself is seen as a problem by those who want to profit from non-renewability of life. That's the key issue. So as Monsanto wrote when writing the TRIPS agreement, the trade-related intellectual property rights agreement, they said we've achieved something unprecedented. We wanted to declare it illegal for farmers to save seeds, because if farmers save seeds, how will we sell seeds? Yeah. So destruction of the farmers' self-sufficiency economy and Atmanirbharta is vital to the profits. Monsanto said we are the patient, diagnostician all in one, and physician all in one. Patient, why is Monsanto a patient? Because farmers are saving seeds. Can you understand the ridiculousness of this? Farmer self-sufficiency is seen as a disease by the greedy. How are they, the diagnostician? They're saying, oh, intellectual property rights to prevent farmers from saving seeds. And their physician is implement these rights. Well, thank goodness I heard them in 1987, which is what led me to save seeds. And I immediately started to create seed banks across India, but also work with our government and our parliament. We passed laws, Article 3G of our patent law, that says plants, animals, and humans are not inventions, therefore cannot be patented. This to me is the distillation of the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Other beings, other plants, animals are not our property, they are our relatives. And as a family, we must live with these relatives with the same care with which we live within our families. Look at the abundance of seed, of desi seed, that is allowed to produce. Seed multiplies. Seed reproduces, seeds disseminate. So again, sitting at the farm the other day, we worked out, he said, okay, 1 carrot, 5,000 carrot seeds. That's the abundance. Tomato, 1 tomato seed, 1,500 tomato seeds. And the family of crops called the millets. The reason they're called millets is because they give 1 million seeds, million according to the Latin correction, 100,000 seeds. Yeah, the ragi, the mandua, the jangora, little grains. And again, talking about the irony of loss of intelligence. These little grains, what are they called in our discourse? Mota anaj. Arey bhai, mota mota hota hai, chota chota hota hai. But chote ko mota bana diya. और सब जगह मोटापा फैला दिया और हर जगह को breed disease हो गया. Look at the chronic diseases, and they have spread because of artificial ingredients. First, artificial soil fertilizer, which gives you no nourishment, and then artificial ingredients in food. High fructose corn syrup instead of real sugar. All kinds of artificial fats that are so unhealthy for us. Seed is the cycle of life. Real seed gives you real food, which gives you real health. That is the cycle. When you break the seed's capacity to produce and you create seed that is non-renewable, either by genetic engineering and GMOs or through non-sustainability of the green revolution varieties, you've broken the link of seeds to healthy food. Food now becomes a source of disease. And instead of nourishing us, it starts to make us sick. 75%, if 1 billion people are hungry, 3 billion are sick because of bad food that's not worthy of eating. 75% of the chronic diseases, 75% chronic diseases come from bad food, which begins with non-seed, seed that isn't true seed. We have worked in Vidarbha. We started the organic movement in our times, Samvardhan in the 80s from Sevagram. But I had to return to Sevagram because it became the capital of farmer suicides, 400,000 suicides, of which 85% are in the cotton belt. Punjab, Vidarbha, Andhra, Karnataka. If you go through it, and the data of, the data of the Crime Bureau shows very clearly which districts have how much. And the districts where the cotton is growing are the highest suicide district. 95% of the cotton is now controlled by Monsanto. 95, it's actually even more, it's 99% according to the Competition Commission of India. What is the BT cotton? It's a genetically modified seed for putting a BT toxin into the plant, and it's supposed to control pests. But the plants have their own ways of controlling pests, and Desi cotton seeds are very pest resilient. They never get pest infestation. The hybrid cotton, the American hybrid cotton, is pest vulnerable. So they did genetic engineering of a vulnerable cotton, put a toxic gene, which they said would now control the pests and you'd never have to spray pesticides. Instead, the plants got attacked with new pests that were never pests of cotton, the armyworm, the bollworm, the aphids, the jassids, an array of new insect pest diseases. Farmers started to spray more pesticides. I remember 2017 rushing down to Yavatmal in Vidarbha because 130 farmers had died because of pesticide poisoning, because of the heavy infestation of pests, more spraying of pesticides, and death due to insecticide poisoning. But even more importantly, these 130 who died, behind them were many who fell sick. Now, here was a technology sold as needing no spray. You will see this pest and you will not need to spray because the plant will control it. No, we've lost our farmers. We've lost our soil organism. We've done studies on the soil status of BT crops. And 4 years ago, 80% of the soil organisms had gone. We studied pollinators. There's not a single pollinator on a BT cotton tree crop because BT cotton is toxic and the bees know that that's toxin. They will not come and kill themselves. So you're killing the whole web of life, which is the food web. That's why we have been not just creating seed banks of Desi seeds of all crops, of rices and wheats, and on our own farm, we conserve 750 rices and 250 kinds of wheat, and every kind of dal that we used to grow, the Norangi, 70 kinds of kidney beans, every kind of edible oil, and our Desi vegetables. We've forgotten our Desi vegetables. You go to the market, you only have imported varieties, all hybrid, all loaded with pesticides. And our vegetables were so thought through in terms of health and nutrition. So we saved seeds and grow seeds of Desi vegetables. Last year, I'm sure even in your area, the rains did not stop. And, even in Delbon, we had so much rain, but the vines did so well. Now, can you imagine the productivity? It uses less than a square millimeter of land. And then it goes to the roof and you get pumpkins on pumpkins on pumpkins. You get tore, you get, we forgot the crops that this land, the seeds that this land gave us. And now with the health crisis, it is important to bring them back. The future of agriculture is the future of seed. Of course, there are those who pushed the green revolution, pushed the chemicals, pushed the GMOs, took the patents, now want to make farmers disappear. And they want to see biodiversity disappear. They're talking about farming without farmers. They're talking about food without soil. They're talking about totally separating soil from the food we eat. But the minute we do that separation, we destroy civilization, we destroy our health. As the Vedas tell us, in this handful of soil is your future. Take care of it, it'll take care of you. Destroy it, it'll destroy you. You can destroy in two ways. Destroy by dispensability and destroy by carelessness. Now, dispensability has already led to such serious crises. I've just come back from a long tour of my new book, Breed to Care, and I could not believe what's happening. So 1 million sheep of Ireland are to be killed in the name of climate change. I mean, the nonsense that is being spoken in the name of climate change is unbelievable, given that I've been in this field for so long. The bovine, the herbivores, the sheep and the cows are herbivores because they eat grass, and that's why they have 4 stomachs. And that's why we used to give them straw. You know, the straw was their food, the grain was our food. Now we are giving them grain. We're giving them intensive soya and corn. 75% of the corn being grown in India today is for animal feed. And we're not giving grass to animals. All the pastures have been destroyed. So instead of recognizing that we are treating animals in the wrong way, giving them the wrong food, this is the reason they have upset stomachs. Upset stomachs leads to methane, just as when we eat the wrong diet, we have a lot of gas. Well, animals fed on a wrong diet of intensive corn and soya meal will get upset stomachs. That's the reason they're being fed so much antibiotics. That's the reason they are becoming emitters of methane. You know, in our cow sheds, I grew up in my mother's cow shed. My research foundation was started in her cow shed. It doesn't stink. We don't have methane. You go to a chicken factory, you're going to get a stink. Those others, that stink is the stink of methane. Now, beginning with this lie of that the methane is true, but then Mr. Gates has written that the 4 stomachs of the cow are the reason there's methane, which is not true. For us, the guy, you know, guy to Gau Mata hai, he's actually writing an ecocide. Thousands of animals, cows have been killed in cancers. 1 million are marked for death in Ireland. They're saying that, you know, in Italy, they took buffaloes from India, I was told, and they make the buffalo mozzarella. Now they're saying, oh, these buffaloes should go and we will make mozzarella from cellular, you know, lab-made artificial food. Those who have made super profits now see artificial food as the source of their future profits. 14 patents on something called an impossible burger. Silicon Valley has made big money on IT, but they're now seeing future money in food. Food is either sacred, from beginning with the sacred seed, going on to sacred food, or it is going to be the root of new impoverishment, new hunger, new disease. If we have to respect zero hunger, we've got to start remembering that feeding the world, feeding all life is the basis of agriculture, and growing seed that creates abundance is the way to zero hunger. The way to hunger for everyone is the way where 1% makes the money, by starving us, speculating on money, speculating on seed, monopolizing seed, taking patents on seed and food. This is the true time for our ecological civilization to rise. You, from the name, your name of your university, I think you're dedicated to this. I hope you will have a partnership with our Earth University where we learn from nature to learn how with the seed we can address every sustainability issue, from climate change to biodiversity, from hunger and disease to poverty. This is the time good universities like yours can do honest research to counter the new imperialism of knowledge that's coming from the West. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a pleasure listening to you, your talk today. I'm sure our audience is waiting to discuss this more with you. Moving ahead, I now open the session for question and answer rounds by the audience. Uh, you can write the questions in the chat box. And from the panelists, if anybody wants some questions, they can ask. From the panelists.
Yeah, I had one question to Madam. That was a wonderful talk from you to realize the importance of sustainable agriculture and also the traditional farming and traditional ways of agriculture. But you were quoting many times about green evolution and how it destroyed some of our practices for the worse. But madam, would it have been possible to sustain ourselves if we had not brought the green revolution at the point when we brought in? If we had not followed Norman Borlaug's suggestions and introduction of the varieties here, would it have been possible for us to become self-sufficient in our food production?
Yeah, so we have to remember that food is the diversity of foods that make for a healthy diet. You need your dals, you need your oil seeds, you need your diversity of cereals, you need your greens and your vegetables. So Borlaug destroyed all other sources of food. But even in wheat and rice, that technology created basically, nutritionally empty commodities. Was there a hunger problem in 1966? No. There was a price rise problem because of the drought of 65. Lal Bahadur Shastri ji wanted to import a little more wheat in order to stabilize the prices. He was told by the US, we will not give you PL4 wheat, you've got to change your system, take the fertilizers and the new seeds. And he said, I will not experiment on such a large way with a country that's so big. I will experiment with it on a small scale, but meantime send us wheat. And they refused to send wheat, and the Green Revolution was introduced under conditionalities on India. Like I said, give me a figure of someone who was dying of hunger in 1967. The last big famine was 42, while the British still ruled us. Famine was totally ended with independence. Land reform, price regulation, rationing, all of these systems that are today's system of food security and sovereignty. So it is not true that Borlaug solved any problem. There wasn't a problem. What he did is leave a legacy of hunger, of disease. And if you go to the tribal areas, they used to eat 80% of their foods from wild sources, from trees and herbs. Today, they're malnourished. The malnourishment of the areas of the tribal areas is not because, it is because we reduce food to 2 crops, rice and wheat, and we reduce cultivation of those crops to chemical farming. When we have eaten, India's the land of diversity. We used to eat 10,000 species of plants. And now part of Navdania's work is to reclaim the knowledge of the wild edible crops. The batwa is such a brilliant food. Amaranth all over the fields. They are killed when you spray with Roundup and weed killers. So that agriculture is actually a way of destroying the food and nutrition availability, because biodiversity is nutrition. And any system that reduces things to monocultures and external inputs creates poverty for the farmer because you're buying the inputs, and reduction of availability of food and nutrition to the people. So both 1 and 2 SDGs are undermined.
And Borlaug's suggestions were not only limited to India, but whole of South Asia. And they did experiment with rice varieties in other countries also through his experiments, and they also increased the production in their own countries. So, but that it is true that over misuse of pesticides and overuse of fertilizers might have created problems that we are now thinking of organic farming.
Borlaug started in Mexico. He was with the DuPont Defense Lab, and then he was put by the US to work on changing the plants in order to sell more chemicals. So the Center for Maize and Wheat Research is actually CIMMYT in Mexico. That's where he started his work. And it's what we'll call the Mexican rice, the wheat he brought here. The reason the South Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries are different from India is because India is the land of diversity. We have the mountains, which are the third pole. We have the desert, which is like the Sahara. We have the semi-arid tracts of the middle. We have the coastal areas. So only in the wet areas of the coast, and of course the center of rice in the Vavilov Center of Rice, in India was rice a major culture. In other places, millets and wheats and corn were the major culture. In Southeast Asia, rice is the only crop they used to grow, because they had so much rain and moisture. But I have been to Indonesia to support farmers who were arrested for growing their own native rice, which has much more nutrition and much more taste and sells at a higher value. But they were arrested. So it was a military operation. It isn't that country just adopted it. So I think it is time to go beyond Borlaug, to go beyond urea, to go beyond rice and wheat alone, and remember how much diversity of seeds we have and how much diversity of crops we need, and that the law of diversity is a law we cannot violate because it connects the diversity of the soil and our gut microbiome. 100 trillion microbes in our gut need more than rice and wheat, and they definitely don't need the chemicals.
The coarse grain consumption in India, has it remained the same with the track?
It's collapsed. I'll give you an example of Madhya Pradesh. I help farmers of Madhya Pradesh save the ancient wheat varieties, and they're selling at a higher value. And they're saying we won 3 times over. We eat less, we eat better, we are healthier. We don't have, it's the new wheats that cause the gluten allergy. The old wheats were patented. I fought that patent case. Madhya Pradesh used to be a millet-eating coarse grain again. Why do we call it coarse? We should call it fine grain. It used to be primarily, wheat used to be eaten once in a while. Punjab was not at all a rice-growing area. It was a jowar bajri area. So I think next year is the year of millets, and I hope your university will celebrate. We have an amazing book called Forgotten Foods, where we have both the diversity of our millets as well as recipes on how to grow them. I'm happy to send through Druna the list of publications that your university can order. And I think, the year of millets next year, the year of 100 years of Harvard, and you being in the home of the Harvard legacy, which is the Indian legacy. That's the point. Here was a Britisher who said, I will not do what the British have told me to do. I will learn from the Indian peasant and make them the professor. Please order the Agricultural Testament from us. This is a book every one of your students should read. It doesn't matter what the discipline.
In the recent times, even the farmers in Punjab, when they were given the option to go for grow less rice and grow other crops instead of rice, the farmers themselves were not in favor of that. How do you look at that?
Well, the thing is, the rice-wheat monoculture system was dependent on a framework of public subsidies. First, the farmer got the subsidies for the chemicals, which were later withdrawn, but there were subsidies for the production. Then there were subsidies in terms of support for procurement. That's what the big debate on MSP is, the minimum support price. And finally, you paid a farmer a fair price after a high cost production. Chemicals have taken production here. You have to produce, pay enough for the farmer to live. But then people of India are poor, so you have to subsidize that food grain again to make it cheap and affordable. So you have 3 levels of subsidies. Our book, Wealth per Acre, has shown that, add the subsidies, add all of this. It's a $1.3 trillion externality that India, as India's environment and the people are bearing. Why are in Punjab, so the infrastructure from 60s is for growing rice and procuring rice. You just tell farmers grow something else. Your mandis aren't catering to it. Your supply systems aren't catering to it. Your public procurement isn't catering to it. The day the center government says all PDS will be dependent on millet, Punjab farmers will shift. Let the public distribution of PDS, midday meal schemes, ICDS schemes shift to organic and healthy eating. The Punjab farmers will shift. All the farmers of India will shift. This is how the word zero hunger came from Brazil. President Lula is the one whose government, and then of course the person who headed zero hunger became the FAO chief. How did they do their zero hunger? They made all their public procurement, the smallest of schools in the remotest area, hospital, feeding the poor, all linked to ecological agriculture, agroecology locally. Farmers had a market, people got healthy food, and Brazil dropped out of the hunger map. Zero hunger in Brazil was achieved by connecting good growing, healthy food, biodiversity with the poorest, who anyway have to be subsidized. That's the key issue. The poor cannot play in the marketplace. You've robbed them of everything. The poor will have to be in a public system of support. The public system of support can either get real food and regenerate agriculture and seed, or the way Brazil did, or it can get fake food and subsidize Mr. Bill Gates to make us eat jhota milk, jhota butter. I don't know if India is willing to sacrifice all of its intelligence for a billionaire to get richer.
Thank you, ma'am. I give space for others to ask, interact with you.
Madam, you will agree with me that there is a quantitative wise, the chemical fertilizers do contribute to yield. When we use chemical fertilizers, we get more yield, grain yield, as compared to organics. How would you react to that?
Well, that's the point that I was making. Yield of what? When you've taken a farming system with 100 plants, including the uncultivated, you've reduced it to one variety. And you've reduced that one variety to one part of that variety. Just the grain. So you've shrunk the overall ecosystem productivity. You've shrunk the productivity of the plant. Dr. Swaminathan has written it, and I've cited him in my book. He says, we did not really increase the biomass. We only changed the partitioning. We put more in the grain and less in the straw. Mm-hmm. So food, like I said, is the currency of life. The straw is food for animals and the soil. It also needs food. Otherwise, we don't have sustainable agriculture. And grain has to be eaten by humans. So a partial part of a yield increasing is not the system yield increasing. And that's why I evolved the criteria of biodiversity-based productive measure, all the biodiversity, measure the quality and nutrition of that biodiversity, not just the mass, because mass is an irrelevant indicator. We don't eat mass, we eat nourishment. Right. You can eat all the mass of the world and be sick and unhealthy and hungry. So the yield is a mismeasure, and that's why we measure nutrition per acre, health per acre, biodiversity per acre. We have to change that reductionist measure of yield, which is the misleading factor, because it did not bring food to people and it starved the soil.
Madam, we need research in the area of validation of organic manures, whether they are so efficient to increase the yield.
I think, Mr. Dar, you're using two reductionist measures. You're first talking about yield. I've just spent 5 minutes explaining yield is a very fractional part of an output of a system. We should be looking at full output and full productivity. And then you're reducing organic to manures. Who said organic is manure? Organic is the science of life, like Ayurveda. Ayur, life, Veda, the science of life. Ayurveda is not medicine. Ayurveda is the science of life, the full set of relationships. Organic is the science of living systems. That's what the original definition is. It is not an input substitution system, use urea or now manure. No, you have to change the whole systemic perception. And that systemic perception is the health of the soil, its relationship to plants, the health of the plants, its relationship to food, the health of the biodiversity of insects, the health of our gut microbiome. These are all part of one system. And as a system, systems don't have single indicators. That's my quantum physics work. In quantum theory, you can't keep looking for a particle if at that phase, the quanta is a wave. Sometimes it's a wave, sometimes it's a particle. So you have to be able to assess that there are waves and particles and be able to see both its potential, of being a wave and a particle. Organic is not manure. It's a system of thinking, it's a science. 2, the indicators of single yield is inappropriate to a system shift. For that, you need 4-dimensional space-time process analysis. And that's a different set of indicators. Process analysis is not mechanical analysis. It is living systems analysis. These are the new systems of living system science that are totally reflecting our ancient ecological knowledge. When Howard recognized Indian peasants as his professor, he was a scientist, but realizing that these are scientists who know more about relationships of the organic system than he does. And he shifted to soil. He wasn't a soil scientist, but he shifted to soil because of the Indian peasants focusing on soil. So what we have to give up actually is the mechanistic way of thinking, the Cartesian Baconian way of thinking is what has got us into this problem. What we have to shift to is ecological interconnected thinking, how systems are interconnected. Systems thinking is the future. Mechanistic thinking is the past.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Dr. Namrata Jain, there are questions in the question box. Can you take that?
Sir, is it, sir?
Yeah. Ma'am, in traditional knowledge systems, which you pointed out has been started to document it, but not many are aware about it. How do we initiate as we have an elective in architecture curriculum?
I didn't get the last bit. Say the last bit again.
Yeah, it's how do we initiate as we have an elective subject in architecture curriculum?
Well, I think it's so important to understand that, in fact, on my flight back, there was a lady architect who recognized me and came and said, I'm so inspired by your work in agriculture, I'm adopting it to architecture. Because as I said in my answer to the last question, we're talking about systems. The Western reductionist thought is about fragmenting systems and not seeing the relationships. In the process, architecture gets divided from agriculture. The country gets divided from the city. But food is the currency. I advise the C40 governments. And I've told them the way to redesign cities to be sustainable, you have to begin with the food, because food is the biggest destroyer of health of the people and the health of the countryside. That's why the new tendencies are 0 miles, 0 kilometer food. The new tendencies are greening cities. I help many cities with urban agriculture and food system. Do read the Milan Declaration. I was ambassador to the Milan Expo on food. And the Milan Declaration is an urban pact that we're going to make cities food systems. So these, these rifts that were created, they are the metabolic rifts, the ruptures, separating soil from plants, our food from our health. Those ruptures are called metabolic rifts. Your work in architecture is to heal those rifts, to bring the connections back to the design of cities, through the flow of food, through green areas, that work we did on our farm, 25 degrees difference. If instead of privileging the car and parking lots in cities, we were privileging the source of our breath and oxygen and shade and temperature and trees, redesign cities according to food trees. Delhi was full of jamun trees, and people used to get free jamun, mango trees, imli trees all over the country. I think we have to re-green our cities as sources of food, sources of shade, sources of oxygen. I think the fossil fuel age has lived its life. it is time to say bye-bye to it. We've spent a lot of our national energy and imagination on designing the world for the calm. It is now time to take care of the soil.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I hereby invite Dr. Namrata Jain, Member Secretary, Center of Excellence Sustainable Development, to express our gratitude towards our esteemed speaker and deliver the words of thanks on behalf of the institution. Ma'am, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Abhijit sir. A very good afternoon, everyone. We are sincerely indebted towards Dr. Vandana Shiva Madam, a renowned name in the field of environment and sustainability, for sparing her valuable time and insightful session on the importance of native seeds in sustainable agriculture. We are thankful to all the guests and dignitaries who joined us virtually. We are grateful towards Honorable Vice Chancellor of the University and Chairperson of the Center, Madam Dr. Santosh, for guiding Center to function at its best. On behalf of Center, I extend my heartiest thanks to all the directors, HOIs and HODs who spared their time and attended the entire session. Last but not least, my thanks goes to all the faculty members of CSD and my dear environmental warriors for attending the webinar virtually. We hope and request Vandana Madam that you will be someday, you will be here in person at campus Sri Vaishnav Vidyapeeth Vishwavidyalaya. Once again, thank you to one and all.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request everybody to kindly stand up for national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Jai Hind.
I once again thank our eminent speaker, all the members and attendees for gracing this event with their presence. Have a nice day.